The Red River Ranch stretched for miles under the blistering Arizona sun, a kingdom of dust, cattle, and silence. From a distance, it looked like a paradise. Green pastures near the river, fine horses in the corral, a great white house standing proud against the horizon. But inside that grand house, behind its shuttered windows, lived a girl who had become a ghost long before death ever came for her. Her name was Clara Hensley, the only daughter of Land Baron Charles Hensley, one of the richest and most feared men west of the Pecos. The townsfolk called her the skeletal daughter, whispering the name behind their hands whenever her thin, veiled figure appeared on the porch. Clara heard them sometimes, voices like dry wind, and it stung worse than the fever that had taken her strength years ago. Her mother had died birthing her, and her father never forgave her for it. He kept her hidden from guests, from life itself. While he drank and gambled and grew richer off others' misery, Clara stayed inside, reading her mother's Bible, looking out at the wildflowers she could not touch. The servants pitied her but dared not speak. No one crossed Charles Hensley and kept their job. At 19, Clara was little more than skin and bone, her wrists fragile as twigs, her hair pale like corn silk. Her only company was the wind that slipped through the cracked windows and the whisper of coyotes at night. She dreamed sometimes of freedom, of stepping barefoot into the dust, of feeling rain on her face. But even her dreams were fragile things, easily crushed by her father's cold voice. Then, one storm-torn night in late summer, the thunder was not from heaven but from hooves. Apache riders came swift and silent through the ranch lands, not to kill but to reclaim a herd of stolen horses that Hensley's men had taken from their territory. The clash was sudden and violent. Shots rang out, flames licked the barn, and men fell. Clara, trembling behind the parlor curtains, saw it all, the lightning flashing against bronze faces, the cry of men who had never known mercy. When the noise finally died, the Apache had taken what was theirs and surrounded the house. Inside, Charles Hensley was a man cornered. His pride, his cattle, his wealth, none of it mattered when faced with the tall figure who stepped through his broken door. The Apache warrior's name was Taza. He was not old, perhaps 30, his eyes dark and steady like the desert at midnight. His people had lost brothers to Hensley's greed, and though he carried rage in his heart, he did not strike the unarmed man before him. Instead, he said in measured English, "You took from us. Now you give back." Hensley, sweating and desperate, pointed a shaking hand toward the stairs. "Take whatever you want. Gold. Horses. Only spare my life." Taza's gaze swept the room, then fell on Clara, who stood at the top of the staircase like an apparition, thin white arms clutching the banister, eyes wide with fear. "Who is she?" he asked. "My daughter," Hensley muttered, voice bitter as dust. "Useless thing, sick, take her if you must. Just go." The words sliced through Clara's chest like a blade. She had known her father's cruelty all her life, but never had it been so complete, to cast her off like a dying mare. Taza's jaw tightened. His people did not trade lives, but this was a man who would sell his own blood to save himself. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, seeing the terror in Clara's eyes and the emptiness in her father's, he nodded once. "I take her," he said, "but not as a slave." As payment for peace, when he reached her, Clara did not resist. Her legs trembled and her breath came shallow, but she did not cry. Perhaps she had no tears left. When Taza lifted her onto his horse, she felt the warmth of life for the first time in years, a steady heartbeat against her side. As they rode into the night, away from Red River Ranch and everything she had ever known, Clara whispered a frail prayer to the wind. She prayed for death, but fate and love had other plans. The trail out of Red River Ranch wound through jagged canyons and endless plains. The night air was sharp, the stars burning white above them. Clara sat slumped in front of Taza, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and horse. Every jolt of the horse's stride made her ribs ache. She did not speak, and neither did he. To Clara, it felt as though she had already died. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. "Take her if you must." The cruelty of it hollowed her even further. She had always known she meant little to him, but to be traded like a rusted tool was more than she could bear. She closed her eyes and prayed she wouldn't wake when dawn came. Taza's people rode ahead, leading the reclaimed horses. The desert wind carried the scent of mesquite and blood. He glanced down at the frail figure in his arms. The girl his enemy had handed over like spoiled grain. She weighed almost nothing. Her wrists were thin as reeds, her face pale against the dark. He wondered how such a creature still breathed. When the first light of morning touched the sky, they stopped by a dry creek bed. The Apaches dismounted, tending to their horses. Taza lowered Clara carefully, but her legs gave out before her feet found the ground. She fell to her knees, gasping softly. "Water," she whispered, her lips cracked and colorless. Taza handed her his canteen without a word. She drank greedily at first, then coughed, trembling. He crouched beside her, his face unreadable. "Slow," he said, his English rough but calm. "You are weak." She looked up at him, blinking through strands of hair. "Why did you take me?" He hesitated. He had asked himself the same question a dozen times since leaving her father's house. The truth was simple. Her father had left him no choice. But the real reason, something deeper, he could not name yet. "Peace," he said finally. "Your father offered you for peace." Her shoulders sagged. "Then I am the price." Taza said nothing. He turned to check his horse's reins, unwilling to look at her face again. She was too fragile, too ghostly, and yet there was something fierce in the way she said those words, like a woman refusing to vanish completely. By midday, the sun burned high and merciless. The group rode on in silence. Clara tried to sit tall, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. Every breath felt shallow. She wondered what her fate would be among these people. Would they make her serve them? Would they leave her to die in the desert? When her vision began to blur, she heard a voice, Taza's again, low and firm. "You fall, I carry you." "I'm fine," she lied, though her strength was gone. Moments later, her body swayed, and before she hit the ground, he caught her. With ease, he lifted her back onto the horse, her cheek against his chest. She was cold to the touch. As the sun dipped lower, they reached the edge of Apache territory, a wide valley scattered with cottonwoods and smoke from distant fires. Children ran out to greet the warriors, women calling from their tents. But when they saw Clara, thin, pale, and trembling, their laughter died. One of the elder men spat on the ground. "White girl," he muttered in Apache. "A curse." Another woman, eyes narrow, asked, "Why bring sickness into our camp?" Taza ignored them and dismounted. He carried Clara in his arms, her head limp against his shoulder, and brought her to his grandmother's tent. Nyola, the tribe's medicine woman, looked up from her fire. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Taza laid Clara down on a blanket. "The landowner gave her to us," he said. "To me. For peace." The old woman studied the girl for a long moment, then said softly, "Peace cannot be bought with bones." She reached out and touched Clara's wrist. The pulse was faint but steady. "She will live," Nyola said, glancing at her grandson. "If the spirits will it." Taza exhaled, his shoulders easing. "Then let them will it," he murmured. As darkness fell and the campfire crackled outside, Clara stirred in her sleep. For the first time in years, someone had spoken of her living, not dying. And though she did not yet understand it, the man who had taken her from her father's cruelty had already begun to give her back something greater than freedom. Life. The dawn came soft and gold across the Apache Valley, touching the tents with warmth and color. Clara woke to the sound of children laughing and the scent of wood smoke drifting through the flap of the hide tent. For a long moment she didn't know where she was. The soft earth beneath her, the quiet murmur of voices, it all felt like a dream. Then memory returned, the raid, her father's betrayal, the dark warrior who had carried her through the desert. She turned her head and saw him outside, crouched by a fire, Taza, the one they called the Sun Warrior. His back was straight, his movements sure as he cleaned a rifle and checked his horse's saddle. He looked like the land itself, strong, unbending, untamed. When Nyola entered the tent with a clay bowl, Clara startled and tried to sit up, but her body refused. "Rest," the old woman said in broken English, her voice both gentle and commanding. "You are not made of stone yet." She handed Clara the bowl, a thin broth that smelled of herbs and smoke. Clara hesitated, but hunger overcame pride. The first sip burned her throat and she coughed softly. Nyola only nodded. "Good, you fight to live. That is enough." Outside, the camp stirred with life. Women grinding maize on flat stones, men sharpening arrows, the sound of drums beating faintly in the distance. Children ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter ringing like bells. Clara had never seen such a world. At the ranch, silence had been her only company. Here, everything moved and breathed in harmony. When Taza entered the tent, she stiffened. His shadow filled the space, but his voice was calm. "You eat," he said. "That is good." Clara looked at him, unsure whether to thank him or curse him. "Why do you care if I live?" she asked. Taza met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Because you are not the one who should die." He paused, then added, "Your father has blood on his hands." "But your hands?" He glanced at her trembling fingers. "They have never held a weapon." His words struck her with unexpected force. No one had ever spoken to her that way, without cruelty, without pity. He turned to leave, but she said softly, "You could have left me to die." He looked over his shoulder. "Maybe," he said, "but then I would have carried your ghost." For days that followed, Clara stayed in Nyola's tent, slowly gathering strength. The tribe kept their distance, suspicious of the pale stranger. When she walked outside, conversations fell silent. Some stared, others turned away. She could feel their mistrust pressing on her like heat. Still, she watched, learning in silence. The rhythm of the women's work, the songs sung at dawn, the respect each person gave the land. One afternoon, Nyola took her to the edge of the river. "Wash," she said simply. "Let the earth know you." Clara knelt beside the cool water, her reflection pale and fragile, like glass ready to break. She cupped water in her hands, letting it run down her arms, her face, her throat. For the first time in her life, she felt something like belonging. Faint, uncertain, but real. From the opposite bank, Taza watched. He didn't move or speak, but his gaze softened. The girl who had been traded for peace now knelt like one seeking forgiveness from the earth itself. There was courage in that simple act. That evening, as the tribe gathered for their meal, Clara sat near Nyola, still too shy to eat among the others. When a small boy ran past and dropped his bowl, she stooped painfully to pick it up. The boy froze, then whispered something to his mother. Moments later, a bowl of roasted corn was quietly placed before Clara. She looked up to find Taza watching her across the fire. He didn't smile, but his eyes spoke what his mouth would not. "They are beginning to see you." As night deepened, drums echoed through the canyon, and Clara lay awake listening to them. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she didn't think of dying. The Apache world was harsh, yes, but in its honesty, its rawness, there was something she had never known before. Hope. The autumn wind swept through the Apache camp. Carrying the scent of smoke, earth, and pine, Clara's body still trembled with weakness, but each sunrise brought a new flicker of strength. The first days, she could hardly lift a wooden bowl. By the second week, she managed to grind maize beside Nyola, though her hands blistered from the effort. The tribe watched quietly, some with suspicion, some with curiosity. The woman who had arrived pale as bone was beginning to change. Her eyes no longer looked haunted, but curious, even alive. Each morning, Taza brought her something: a gourd of milk, a strip of dried meat, sometimes herbs steeped in water. He said little, only nodding for her to eat. When she protested that she could not take his food, he answered, "The tribe shares. You must live." At first, Clara took his words as duty, the same kind of cold obligation her father once gave to his hired men. But the way Taza lingered by the fire, the way his eyes followed her when she coughed, made her wonder if there was more beneath his silence. One night, fever took her. It came suddenly. Sweat, trembling, the taste of iron in her mouth. She tried to rise from her blanket but collapsed. The tent spun, firelight flickering into strange shapes. She heard voices distant and muffled, Nyola calling for Taza. When he entered, she barely recognized him. His face was shadowed, his eyes fierce with worry. "Clara," he said, kneeling beside her. "Breathe." She tried, but each breath burned like glass in her chest. "I can't," she whispered. "Please, just let it end." Taza caught her hand, small, cold, fragile, and pressed it to his heart. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet." He stayed with her through the night, cooling her forehead with water, feeding her drops of herbal broth between her cracked lips. When her body shuddered from pain, he whispered to her in Apache, words she didn't understand but felt deep inside her soul. He spoke of his sister Kaya, who had once been sick like her. He told her how she had died under the same stars, how the world had gone silent after. "You breathe," he said softly. She could not. That means something. Clara wanted to believe him. His voice was steady, grounding her in the storm. And as dawn broke, her fever broke with it. She slept for hours, dreamless and still. When she awoke, the world seemed brighter. Nayola smiled faintly and murmured, "The spirits gave you back." Outside the tent, Taza sat sharpening his knife, exhaustion dark beneath his eyes. When Clara stepped out wrapped in a blanket, he looked up in quiet surprise. "You are stubborn," he said. She managed a weak smile. "You didn't let me die." He shrugged, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "It was not your time." From that day, the tribe began to see her differently. The old women called her Taza's ghost wife, half in jest, half in awe. They said the spirits had chosen her to walk the thin line between death and life. Clara blushed at the name, but Taza didn't correct them. He only said, "She is alive." That is all that matters. As weeks passed, color returned to her cheeks, and her laughter, soft, uncertain, began to ripple through camp. She helped grind corn, gathered wood, even tried to learn the Apache words for things. Sun, water, wind, heart. When she mispronounced them, Taza would shake his head, half amused, half patient. "You have a spirit like fire," he told her once, "hidden under ashes." The word sank deep into her. Fire. She had never thought of herself as such a thing. Yet each day, as she stood a little taller, breathed a little deeper, she began to feel that truth kindling inside her. That night, as the fire crackled outside the tent, Clara stared into the flames and whispered, "I want to live." And somewhere beyond the darkness, Taza's voice came, low, certain. "Then live, white dove. The fire in your bones has only begun to burn." By the time winter brushed the desert with frost, Clara had become a part of the rhythm of Apache life. She still carried the pale look of someone who had lived too long in shadow, but her steps had grown steadier, her hands stronger. The tribe had stopped staring when she passed. Now they nodded, cautious but not unkind. Every morning she awoke to the sound of horses snorting in the dawn and children shouting as they chased each other through the dust. The air smelled of cedar and roasted corn, and always she saw Taza standing near the river, shirtless even in the cold, his long hair tied back as he bathed in the freezing water like it meant nothing. She would watch from afar, feeling something unfamiliar flicker in her chest, a kind of warmth that frightened her more than her old sickness ever had. Taza began teaching her the Apache language, patient and steady though he rarely smiled. They sat by the fire in the evenings, a hide stretched between them with marks drawn in charcoal. He pointed to the fire. "Da, da," she repeated softly. He pointed to his chest. "Shili, my heart." She hesitated, then placed a hand over her own. "Shili," Taza nodded. "Good." Sometimes, when she stumbled over a sound, he would laugh under his breath, a quiet rumble that startled her. "Your tongue is stubborn," he teased. She smiled shyly. "So is yours." Day by day, she began to understand more. Not just the words, but the soul of them. Apache was a language of earth and spirit, of things felt more than named. There were words for the sound of rain on dry soil, for the ache in one's heart when the wind changes direction. Words her old life had never needed, because her old life had been built on silence. In return, she taught him English letters. She drew them in the dirt, shaping the word sun. He squinted. "This says Taza." She laughed softly. "No, this says sun. But yes, it means you." He smiled then. A rare, quiet smile that made her forget how to breathe. When her strength returned fully, Nayola gave her tasks, grinding herbs, boiling water, tending to wounds. Clara's delicate hands, once useless at the ranch, now mixed salves and wrapped bandages with care. The tribe began to call her the White Healer, but the healing went both ways. One evening she found Taza sitting alone at the edge of camp, staring into the distance. His posture was rigid, his expression stormy. She approached carefully. "What troubles you?" He hesitated before answering. "My people are angry. They say we took too little from your father, that peace cannot last." Clara sat beside him on the cold ground. "They are wrong. You took enough. You took me." He looked at her sharply, but she held his gaze. "I was nothing there," she said quietly. "No one. You saw me. That was enough." For a moment the only sound was the whisper of wind. Then he said softly, "You speak like someone who has lived many lives." "Maybe I have," she murmured. "The first one ended the night you took me away." Taza turned toward her, eyes dark with something unspoken, sorrow, longing, perhaps both. "And this life?" he asked. She met his gaze. "This one has just begun." The moon rose behind them, spilling silver over the camp. In that light, Taza saw not the frail daughter of a cruel man, but a woman reborn, her eyes alive with courage, her hands no longer shaking. When she laughed, it was soft but full, like music breaking through years of silence. The sound turned every head around the fire, and though neither of them spoke it aloud, Taza knew, somewhere between the lessons, the healing, and the shared silences, that love had already begun to speak its own language between them. The cold months softened into spring, and with them, Clara's world began to bloom. The river that had run thin through winter now rushed bright and full, carrying petals and driftwood downstream. She often went there at dusk, gathering smooth stones or washing clothes beside the other women. They no longer looked at her as a stranger. They spoke to her in fragments, smiles lighting their faces when she replied in halting Apache. But it was Taza's presence that lingered most. He came to her often now, not with orders or lessons but with quiet companionship. Some nights they sat together by the fire saying little. It wasn't words that passed between them, but the steady, calm rhythm of understanding. One evening, as twilight deepened into purple, Clara stood by the water's edge. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of sage. She heard Taza approach, and she always knew his step. "You come here often," he said. She turned, smiling faintly. "It's peaceful. The river listens better than most people." He chuckled, a deep, quiet sound. "You think too much for one so young." "I've had too much silence," she said. "Now I have to fill it with thoughts." Taza stepped closer, the reflection of moonlight dancing on his dark hair. For a moment, neither spoke. The rush of the water filled the space between them. Then in a low voice he said, "You are not what I expected." She blinked. "What did you expect?" "A ghost. A girl too weak to live." He paused, eyes softening. "But you have fire. You wake before the sun, you work, you laugh. You speak to my people without fear." Clara's throat tightened. "They were kind to let me stay." "They see your spirit," he said. "You are not the same woman I carried from your father's house." She met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile but powerful. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the air humming with possibility. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "You've given me life, Taza. More than medicine or food could. You made me want to live again." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "And you have given me peace." I did not think it possible to feel peace again. Their eyes locked. The world seemed to still. Then Clara looked away, her heart hammering. She knelt to pick up a stone, needing something to do with her shaking hands. "The peace may not last," she whispered. "If my father comes," Taza stepped closer. "Then he will find a woman, not a ghost. And I will not let him take you." His words should have frightened her, but they didn't. They warmed her instead, like the firelight that had begun to glow inside her heart. That night, when the camp gathered around the great fire, she sat across from him. Laughter echoed, drums beat low and slow. She caught Taza's eyes through the smoke, and though neither moved nor spoke, the world seemed to shrink until there was only the two of them, the wounded girl and the warrior who had become her healing. Later, when most had gone to their tents, she stayed by the dying embers, tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick. Taza returned from his watch and sat beside her. "Why do you not sleep?" he asked. "I don't want to miss the night," she said softly. "It feels alive." He studied her face and the glow of the fire touching her cheeks, her eyes shining with new strength. "You are alive," he said. "That is what I see when I look at you." She met his gaze, and the air thickened between them. Neither spoke. There was no need. His hand brushed hers just once lightly, and her breath caught when she finally whispered, "Taza." His name trembled like a secret. He leaned closer, voice low. "Sleep, white dove. Tomorrow you will dream of sunlight." She smiled faintly and lay down near the fire. But as she closed her eyes, she knew it was not the sunlight she dreamed of. It was him. And somewhere in that still desert night, while the stars turned above them, love took root. Quiet, unspoken, but deep as the river that had carried her from one life into another. The night wind whispered through the Apache camp, carrying with it the smoke of mesquite and the faint scent of rain. In the warrior's lodge, the pale daughter of the landowner stirred restlessly on her blanket. For nights, her body had fought sleep. The pain in her ribs, the ache of fever, and the strange pull of new emotions had kept her hovering between waking and dreams. But tonight something was different. Taza had sat beside her all evening, grinding herbs in silence. He didn't ask how she felt, nor did he speak of the dreams that haunted her. Instead, he placed a clay bowl by the fire, its contents thick and green, and looked at her with calm eyes. "Drink," he said. "It will make your heart quiet." Her frail hand trembled as she reached for the bowl. "I've had enough medicine to fill a pond," she murmured weakly. "This is not the white man's poison," Taza replied. "It's from the earth. My mother gave it to my sister when she nearly died." Something in his tone, gentle yet firm, made her obey. The drink was bitter, but warmth spread through her chest as she swallowed. She lay back, watching the flicker of firelight dance on the walls, and for the first time in years her body began to unclench. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. The sound no longer frightened her. She turned her head slightly and saw Taza watching her, his face unreadable, carved from quiet strength. "Why do you care if I live or die?" she whispered, her eyelids heavy. He hesitated, then spoke in a low, rumbling voice. "When I first saw you, I thought you were a spirit, a lost one. I took you because your people offered you like a thing to be rid of. But now I see." He trailed off, eyes fixed on the fire. "You are not weak. You are fighting to return to the earth." Her heart clenched. No one had ever called her strong. Not her father, not the doctors, not the house servants who whispered she was as good as gone. Taza placed another blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders with careful hands. His touch was respectful, almost reverent. "Sleep," he said simply. "The earth will hold you tonight." And she did. The wind died down, and the stars stretched endless above the plains. For the first time since she was a child, she didn't dream of pain or fever. She dreamed of riding across the desert on a strong horse, the wind in her hair, her body weightless. When dawn came, Taza found her still sleeping. The faint color of life had returned to her cheeks. He smiled, a rare, private thing, and stepped outside to gather water. By the time she awoke, sunlight poured through the lodge opening, warm and golden. She blinked, confused at first by the absence of pain. Her limbs felt light, her chest no longer heavy with sickness. She sat up slowly, and the movement didn't bring dizziness. Taza entered carrying a wooden bowl of water. His dark eyes brightened when he saw her awake. "You slept long," he said. "I slept without pain," she replied softly, a tremor in her voice. "I can't remember the last time that happened." He set the bowl beside her and said nothing. But his silence carried more meaning than any words. As she sipped the cool water, she realized something profound. His presence, his quiet strength, and his patience had done more to heal her than any doctor's potion ever could. For the first time, she began to wonder if she had been given to the Apache warrior not as punishment or transaction, but as salvation. Outside, the sky was brilliant and wide. Her heart, once shrunken by sorrow, felt a flicker of life, and that morning, as Taza helped her step out into the light, the land itself seemed to welcome her, like a daughter finally returned home. The plains came alive that evening with the rhythm of drums and the scent of rain. A festival fire burned high in the center of the Apache camp, sending sparks into the dusky sky. It was a celebration of survival. The rain had finally broken, a long drought, and the tribe rejoiced with food, song, and dance. For the first time, the skeletal daughter of the landowner stood among them, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. Her pale dress, once torn and soiled from her captivity, had been mended by Apache women. Her golden hair was braided with desert flowers, and her once hollow eyes reflected the fire's glow. Taza watched her quietly from the edge of the circle. He hadn't asked her to join the dance, but she saw his gaze. Steady, proud, and patient. It was an invitation without words. When the drumming began, she felt her heart pound with it. Her body, once frail and lifeless, now moved to the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. She laughed, a sound foreign even to her own ears, and the women around her smiled in approval. She twirled, stumbled once, but caught herself. Taza's eyes never left her. His people had accepted her in small ways over the past days. But tonight, she crossed into something deeper. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was part of their song. As the fire grew brighter, the rain began to fall, first in drops, then in a soft curtain that hissed against the flames. The people only danced harder, their feet splashing in the wet earth, faces turned to the heavens. Taza stepped forward at last. His broad shoulders glistened with rain, his hair dark and slick against his neck. Without a word, he extended his hand. She took it. The contact was electric. His skin was warm, his grip firm, grounding her in a way she'd never known. Together they moved through the circle, his steps measured, hers unsure but eager. The rhythm of the drums echoed through her bones, and she felt the pulse of life surge within her like a second heartbeat. "Why do they dance when it rains?" she asked breathlessly, tilting her face upward. Taza's deep voice answered softly, almost lost in the thunder. "Because rain is mercy. It reminds us that life comes again after the earth suffers. Like you." Her eyes met his then, truly met his, and she saw no pity there, only admiration. The realization struck her heart with both tenderness and fear. For years her reflection had been her enemy, a thin, dying girl with shadows under her eyes. But in his gaze, she was something else, a woman reborn from dust. The dance slowed. The fire hissed and crackled as smoke curled upward, the scent of cedar and wet earth mingling in the air. Around them, laughter and chanting faded into a hum, as if the world itself was pausing to breathe. When the final drumbeat fell silent, Taza and the woman stood still in the rain, hand in hand. She whispered, "You've given me back my life." He shook his head slowly. "No, you fought for it. I only reminded you that your heart still beats." The words sank deep into her soul. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks, not tears of pain, but of release. He brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. "Tomorrow I'll take you to the canyon," he said. "You'll see where the water is born. Then you'll know how strong the earth can be after suffering." She nodded, unable to speak, feeling something sacred unfold between them, something more powerful than fear, deeper than gratitude. The fire burned low and the tribe began to drift to their shelters. Still they stood in the rain, their silhouettes merging against the soft glow of embers. It was in that moment, under thunder and moonlight, that the frail daughter of the landowner understood what true healing meant. Not just to live, but to feel alive. The next morning dawned cool and clear, the sky a sweep of blue unmarred by clouds. The world smelled fresh as though the rain had washed away every sorrow. Taza led her from the camp before the sun climbed too high, 2 horses carrying them through the open plains toward the canyon he had spoken of. She rode carefully, though her body, once brittle as a twig, no longer trembled with weakness. The strength she'd gained still felt like a borrowed miracle. Each breath of dry, fragrant air filled her lungs with purpose. For a long while, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the creak of leather saddles and the rhythmic pounding of hooves. She watched the horizon unfold, red cliffs rising in the distance, sunlight dancing on the rocks. When they reached the canyon's edge, Taza helped her dismount. "Here," he said, pointing downward. "The earth opens itself to let the water be born." She stepped to the brink, gripping his hand for balance. Below, a narrow stream shimmered through the canyon floor, cutting through stone that looked ancient as time itself. The sound of rushing water echoed upward like the heartbeat of the land. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's alive." Taza nodded. "When the sky is cruel and the rivers dry, this place still gives water. My people call it Sia Nigo, the mother's breath." She looked at him then, realizing how the words fit her own journey. Once her spirit had been a dry well, empty, hopeless. But somehow, Through his care and the tribe's acceptance, her heart had found water again. Taza crouched near the edge and cupped water in his palms, letting it spill through his fingers. "The land never stops fighting to live," he said. "Even the hardest rock breaks when water keeps flowing." She knelt beside him, touched the cool stream, and smiled faintly. "I think I was rock once," she murmured. "Cold and unyielding, but you kept coming back." He gave her a small, knowing smile. "You were never stone, only buried beneath it." They sat together in silence, listening to the wind whisper through the canyon walls. A hawk circled high above, its cry sharp and free. After a long while, she spoke softly. "I used to pray to die. I thought there was no purpose in living when I was just wasting away." Her voice faltered, thick with emotion. "But now I don't want to go back. I don't want to be that ghost." Taza turned toward her, his expression solemn but tender. "Then don't. You have a new life now. You are not a prisoner here." She met his gaze, unsure how to answer. The truth was she no longer felt captive, but neither did she feel free in the way she once imagined. Freedom, she was learning, wasn't about running away. It was about belonging somewhere that gave you breath again. When he rose to his feet, he extended his hand. "Come, there's a cave behind the falls. My mother once said spirits rest there when they are ready to be reborn." She followed him down a narrow path, the roar of the waterfall growing louder until they stood behind its shimmering curtain. Inside the cave, sunlight filtered through the water, painting the walls with rippling light. She stood in awe. The air was damp and cool, filled with the scent of moss and life. Taza turned to her. "Do you know why I brought you here?" She shook her head. "Because I want you to remember this place when you doubt yourself again," he said. "When you think you are too fragile, too broken, remember the canyon. It stands because it yields. It endures because it bends." Her eyes stung with tears. Slowly, she stepped toward him and placed a trembling hand on his chest. "And what about you, Taza? What do you endure for?" He covered her hand with his. "For love that heals," her breath caught. The words hung between them raw and sacred. Outside, the waterfall thundered on, drowning the past and washing the world clean. And in that hidden cave, under the trembling light of water and sun, the frail daughter of the landowner felt her soul awaken completely, reborn, like the canyon itself. The summer sun blazed across the plains, painting the land in gold and shadow. Weeks had passed since the day in the canyon, and everything about her world had changed. She was no longer the skeletal daughter whispered about in hushed tones. Her cheeks glowed with color. Her steps carried strength. Even her laughter, once brittle as glass, rang through the Apache camp like birdsong. Taza watched her from a distance as she helped grind corn with the women. She spoke slowly in their language now, stumbling over words but smiling through her mistakes. Each day she learned a little more: how to weave grass baskets, how to gather herbs, how to live with the land instead of fearing it. Yet, there was still a part of her that belonged to another world. The white ranch house she'd left behind, her father's land, the ghost of who she used to be. Sometimes when the wind blew from the east, she'd turn her face toward it and wonder if her father ever thought of her, or if he believed she'd died out here in the wilderness. That evening, Taza approached her as she sat near the fire, brushing her hair. The flames reflected in his eyes as he said quietly, "Tomorrow I'll take you back to the edge of your father's land." Her hand froze mid-brush. "Back?" he nodded. "You were not meant to be kept. I wanted to heal you, not hold you prisoner." The words struck deep, and though they were kind, they filled her with sudden dread. "And if I don't want to go back?" she whispered. Taza's jaw tightened. "Then you must choose. The land of your blood or the life you have found here." The fire popped softly between them. Her heart beat wildly because she knew what both choices meant. Going back meant returning to a world that had already buried her. Staying meant surrendering to a new life built from tenderness and courage, and to the man who had awakened both. That night, she couldn't sleep. The stars above seemed to whisper her name, pulling her between past and present. At dawn, she rose and found Taza waiting with 2 horses. Together they rode in silence toward the borderlands where his territory met her father's range. The world stretched vast and quiet around them. When they finally stopped at a rise overlooking the distant ranch house, she sat very still. The white building gleamed faintly in the sun like a ghost of her former self. "That's where I almost died," she murmured, and where they buried everything soft in me. Taza dismounted and stood beside her. You can start again there if you wish, he said. You owe me nothing. Her throat tightened. You're wrong, she said softly. I owe you everything. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You taught me that love isn't weakness, she continued, her voice trembling. You showed me that the body can heal, but the heart must choose to live. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she reached for his hand. I choose you, Taza. Not because I am bound, but because I am free. Something shifted in his gaze. Relief, joy, disbelief, all at once. Slowly, he lifted her hand to his lips. Then the earth has truly given me a gift, he said quietly. They rode back to the camp together, the wind trailing behind them like music. That evening, when the tribe gathered for the harvest feast, she stood beside Taza, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The women sang blessings over them, and the fire painted their faces in gold. Later that night, as the stars blazed across the black sky, Taza held her close and whispered, The spirits heal through love. You were the proof I needed, she smiled through tears. And you were the breath I needed to live. Beneath the endless sky of the Wild West, surrounded by the people who had become her family, she knew that she had not only been healed by his love, she had been reborn through it. The land was no longer cruel. It was alive, forgiving, and filled with promise. And when dawn came, it found the Apache warrior and the once frail daughter standing together on the plains, strong, whole, and utterly unbroken.